Imagine waking up one day, standing in front of a mirror, and seeing someone you don't quite recognize. The reflection staring back at you is familiar, yet foreign, a distorted version of yourself, shaped by a lifetime of expectations, judgments, and beliefs that aren't truly yours. You catch a glimpse of this person, trapped within a web of thoughts that constantly reinforce their limitations, their desires, and their fears. And then the realization strikes: the identity you've been living with, the one you've clung to as you, might not be who you really are at all. In that moment, you feel a rush of confusion. You thought you knew yourself. You thought you understood who you were, what you wanted, and how you fit into the world. But now, standing before this stranger in the mirror, you begin to question everything. What if all of it, the ambition, the fears, the pride, the shame, has been fabricated by something that isn't even you? What if this version of yourself isn't authentic at all, but merely the creation of something much deeper and more powerful? This something is the ego. It has shaped your perception of the world and your place within it for as long as you can remember. It defines how you see yourself, how you interact with others, and even how you interpret the events of your life. But here's the paradox. While the ego is the force that constructs your reality, it is also the force that keeps you imprisoned within it. The very thing that gives you an identity is the very thing that limits your potential. How much of your life has been dictated by the ego's desires, fears, and judgments? How many of your choices, relationships, and beliefs are influenced by this hidden force that you often mistake for your true self? Now ask yourself this: what would happen if you could strip away the layers of the ego, the labels, the roles, the masks, and discover what lies beneath? What if you could experience the world not through the lens of who you think you are, but as you truly are, free from the constraints of the self that the ego has created? This is not a theoretical question. This is an existential one. Because the truth is, your ego shapes your perception of reality in ways that go far beyond your conscious awareness. It governs the way you think, feel, and react, trapping you in a cycle of limitations that feel impossible to break. You might not even realize how deeply its influence runs. The world you see, the people you interact with, and even your experiences are all filtered through the lens of the ego. The ego is the architect of your mental prison, creating a narrative that feels real, but is, in fact, an illusion, a story that you've come to believe because it is the only one you've ever known. And herein lies the most unsettling question: what if the reality you've been living is nothing more than a construct, a reflection of the ego's deep-seated need to maintain control over who you think you are? The ego doesn't just shape your perception of yourself, it shapes the very fabric of your world. It creates the boundaries of your reality, reinforcing the belief that this is who you are, this is what you can do, and this is what the world is like. It builds walls around you, making the world seem smaller, more predictable, and more confined to your personal narrative. But here's the real kicker: the ego doesn't want you to know this. It wants to keep you in the dark, trapped in the illusion of identity that it has carefully crafted. It thrives on certainty, on control, on maintaining the status quo. It's afraid of change, of letting go of the familiar structures that have kept it safe. So, it keeps you bound to the very beliefs and identities that hold you back, all while convincing you that you are in control. As you stand before the mirror, wondering if this reflection is truly you, the great question begins to form. How do you break free from this construct? How do you dismantle the very force that has shaped your perception of reality for your entire life? The answer lies within the ego itself, but before you can uncover it, you must first understand how the ego operates. How does it create the reality you experience? What are the psychological and philosophical roots of this force that governs your every thought and action? The journey to understanding the ego's role in shaping your reality begins with diving deep into its hidden nature. And as we explore this, you'll begin to unravel the web that has kept you trapped, and discover a path toward liberation. But first, we must uncover the truth about the ego, its origins, and why it holds such a powerful grip over your life. To begin understanding the profound grip the ego holds over us, we must first delve into its psychological and philosophical origin. The ego is not just a random collection of thoughts and beliefs. It is a deeply ingrained part of our mental and emotional infrastructure, shaped by both innate psychological mechanisms and the cultural forces around us. But why is this seemingly abstract force so powerful? What makes it such a fundamental aspect of our identity and perception of reality? Let's start with Carl Jung, one of the most influential thinkers when it comes to understanding the ego's psychological roots. For Jung, The ego was not inherently negative, but rather the conscious aspect of the self, the part of us that deals with the external world and manages our identity. It's the aspect of our psyche that defines who we are in relation to others. Jung referred to the ego as the center of consciousness, the focal point of all our conscious thoughts, memories, and experiences. It is the I that we identify with daily, the self that we cling to in an attempt to maintain stability in an ever-changing world. However, Jung also pointed out a darker side to the ego. While it provides us with a sense of identity, it can also become rigid and overbearing, narrowing our perception of who we are and what we are capable of. The ego creates an image of the self that is confined to a limited set of experiences, traits, and beliefs. This image, the persona, as Jung called it, becomes so ingrained in our minds that we start to identify with it completely. We begin to believe that we are only the roles, labels, and expectations that the ego has shaped for us. Our true selves, the deeper, unconscious aspects of who we are, remain hidden in the shadows, suppressed by the ego's insistence on control and certainty. This brings us to another critical point: the ego's desire for control. From a psychological standpoint, the ego thrives on stability and certainty. It wants to keep everything within a defined boundary, ensuring that our sense of self remains unchallenged. This drive for control explains why the ego tends to distort reality. In the ego's world, things must fit neatly into the boxes it has created. Anything that doesn't align with its established narrative of who we are or what the world is like is pushed aside, ignored, or rejected. This is where the ego creates a false, narrow reality, one in which we become trapped. The ego's need for control is a direct result of fear: fear of losing the sense of self, fear of the unknown, fear of being nothing or no one. It's no surprise, then, that the ego is deeply tied to our survival instincts. In our evolutionary past, having a strong sense of identity and the ability to distinguish between self and other was essential for survival. The ego was, in a sense, a defense mechanism, helping us navigate the external world and protect our sense of self in a chaotic, often dangerous environment. But as civilization advanced, this once useful mechanism became less about survival and more about preserving the mental structures we've built around our identities. This psychological need for control is not only individual but collective. Society, culture, and family have all played significant roles in shaping the ego. Friedrich Nietzsche, a philosopher who probed deeply into the structures of human identity, argued that the ego, in many ways, is a product of societal conditioning. Nietzsche's concept of the slave morality describes how social and cultural forces shape our values, beliefs, and perceptions of self-worth. In his view, the ego is deeply influenced by the values imposed by society, values that dictate what is considered acceptable, good, and meaningful. These external forces teach us to suppress certain desires, embrace others, and conform to a set of standards that align with the collective norms of the group. The problem, as Nietzsche saw it, is that this external conditioning distorts our true nature. The ego becomes a mask, a persona that conforms to society's expectations rather than embracing the full complexity and depth of the individual self. We are taught to identify with the roles we play: student, employee, parent, etc., and the external validation we receive: approval, success, status. But in doing so, we lose touch with who we really are beneath these layers, often becoming so entangled in the mask that we mistake it for our true self. We stop questioning whether the person we have become is genuinely our own creation, or merely a product of external influences and cultural pressures. Arthur Schopenhauer, another influential philosopher, expanded on this by considering the ego from a more existential perspective. For Schopenhauer, the ego was a manifestation of the will to live, an insatiable force driving us to seek survival, pleasure, and dominance. But this will, in Schopenhauer's view, is ultimately futile. It drives us into a cycle of constant wanting, always desiring more, never fully satisfied. The ego, in this sense, becomes the driving force behind endless craving, perpetuating the illusion that fulfillment and meaning lie outside of us, within the world, within possessions, within status. Yet, no matter how much we chase after these external desires, the ego keeps us wanting, keeps us searching, keeps us trapped in an endless loop of dissatisfaction. This cycle of craving and discontent leads to a vicious feedback loop. As we continually seek external validation, be it through success, approval, or material possessions, the ego grows stronger. It demands more control, more affirmation, more recognition. But the more we cater to the ego's desires, the more disconnected we become from the deeper aspects of ourselves. We lose touch with our authentic nature, our true desires, and our inherent potential. Instead, we become prisoners to the very force that was meant to help us survive and thrive. This existential frustration has deep consequences on our mental well-being. Jean-Paul Sartre, another key existentialist thinker, saw the ego as a barrier to true freedom. He argued that the ego confines us to a limited sense of self, binding us to an identity defined by past actions, social roles, and external validation. In Sartre's view, the ego confines us to the past, trapping us in a fixed identity. But true freedom, he believed, lies in transcending this fixed identity and embracing our capacity to choose, to create ourselves anew in each moment. However, to break free from the grip of the ego requires confronting the existential anxiety that comes with the realization that we are, in fact, free. The ego seeks to shield us from this anxiety by constructing a stable, predictable identity, one that provides us with the illusion of control and security. The deeper psychological and philosophical roots of the ego reveal its complexity. On the one hand, it is a necessary part of our psyche, a tool that helps us navigate the world, form relationships, and create meaning. But on the other hand, when it becomes rigid, self-reinforcing, and disconnected from our true nature, the ego limits our potential and traps us in an illusion of selfhood. As we move forward in exploring how the ego creates and distorts our reality, it's essential to keep these insights in mind. The ego is not just an external force, but an internal one. It is the lens through which we perceive ourselves and the world. But it's also the barrier that prevents us from seeing reality as it truly is. It's the source of many of our internal conflicts, and it's the reason we often feel stuck, dissatisfied, or disconnected from our deeper selves. So, what happens when we begin to see the ego for what it truly is? What happens when we start to strip away the layers it has built around us, exposing the raw truth beneath? To answer this, we must look at the unseen consequences of the ego's power, the ways it silently shapes our personal and societal realities. The true power of the ego lies not in its overt actions, but in its quiet, insidious influence on every aspect of our lives. It is a force that operates beneath the surface of our conscious awareness, shaping our thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and even the way we interact with the world. Its consequences are subtle, often invisible, but they are no less powerful for their elusiveness. The ego has a way of embedding itself into our daily experiences, controlling our perceptions, and creating a reality that feels inescapable. But the real danger is that we don't even realize it's happening. At the core of the ego's power is its ability to distort reality. The ego shapes our perceptions of the world by filtering everything through its narrow lens of self-interest and self-preservation. It causes us to see everything in terms of me and mine, a constant focus on how things affect our sense of self. This is the root of all attachment, fear, and suffering. When we identify with the ego, we begin to see the world as a place full of threats to our identity, full of potential dangers that could undermine our sense of who we are. Take, for example, the way we perceive other people. The ego encourages us to see others as either allies or threats, based on how they might enhance or diminish our sense of self-worth. We measure ourselves against them, comparing our successes to their failures, our status to their achievements. The ego feeds on these comparisons, using them to create a false sense of superiority or inferiority. This constant measuring and judging distort our relationships, preventing us from truly connecting with others. We don't see them as they are. We see them only in relation to ourselves, as reflections of our own ego-driven desires and fears. This leads to the first of the unseen consequences of the ego, the distortion of our relationships. When we interact with others through the lens of the ego, we are unable to experience true intimacy, compassion, or understanding. Every relationship becomes transactional, based on what the other person can offer us in terms of validation, approval, or status. We don't connect with them as human beings. We connect with them as extensions of our own self-image. This makes genuine connection nearly impossible, as we are constantly measuring and assessing, never fully present with the other person. The ego also distorts our sense of purpose. It creates a false narrative of who we are and what we are meant to do. We begin to identify with the roles we play: employee, partner, parent, friend, and we measure our worth by how well we perform in these roles. The ego tells us that our value is determined by external achievements, by the things we have or the people we impress. It convinces us that we must constantly strive for more success, more recognition, more possessions, because it feeds on the illusion of scarcity. The ego is never satisfied. No matter how much we achieve, it always demands more, reinforcing the belief that we are incomplete and need external validation to feel whole. This brings us to the second unseen consequence, the perpetual cycle of dissatisfaction. No matter how much we accomplish, the ego will always tell us it's not enough. It constantly moves the goalposts, convincing us that we must keep striving for something outside ourselves in order to feel validated. This constant striving keeps us trapped in a cycle of craving and dissatisfaction, preventing us from experiencing true contentment. We are never fully present in the moment because the ego always has us focused on the future, on what we don't have yet, on what we must become in order to be worthy. But the consequences of the ego's control extend beyond our personal lives. They shape the very fabric of society itself. The ego, with its focus on separation, competition, and individualism, is the driving force behind many of the societal structures that dominate our world. It fuels consumerism, materialism, and the relentless pursuit of wealth and status. It creates a world in which people are valued based on their ability to accumulate power, resources, and influence. It tells us that we are separate from each other, that our worth is determined by how much we can achieve on our own, rather than through collective effort and cooperation. The ego's influence also reinforces societal inequalities. It fosters the belief that some people are more deserving than others based on their achievements, appearance, or social standing. It creates hierarchies, divides people into categories, and perpetuates systems of oppression. The ego justifies discrimination and exploitation by convincing us that those who are less fortunate are somehow inferior or undeserving. It blinds us to the interconnectedness of all people, keeping us focused on our own desires and fears instead of the shared humanity that unites us all. This leads to the third unseen consequence, the creation of societal divisions and inequalities. The ego fosters a world in which we are constantly measuring ourselves against others, comparing our worth to theirs. This creates competition, conflict, and division, preventing us from working together to address the common challenges we all face. The ego tells us that we are separate from one another, that we must compete for limited resources, and that only those who are the most successful or powerful deserve to thrive. This mindset leads to a world in which the rich get richer, the powerful maintain control, and the rest are left to fend for themselves. On a deeper level, the ego also shapes our internal experience of life. It creates the illusion that we are separate from the world around us, that we are isolated, individual beings disconnected from the vast, interconnected whole of existence. The ego convinces us that our thoughts, emotions, and experiences are uniquely ours, isolated within our individual consciousness. It isolates us from the present moment, convincing us that we are defined by our past and future, rather than by the continuous flow of life itself. We begin to see ourselves as separate from nature, from other people, and from the universe. This is the fourth and perhaps most profound consequence, the illusion of separateness. The ego's primary function is to reinforce the belief that we are distinct, isolated entities, separate from everything else. It creates the sense that we are separate from other people, from the natural world, and even from our own deeper consciousness. This illusion of separateness is the root of all suffering. It leads to feelings of loneliness, alienation, and disconnection. It keeps us trapped in a narrow, self-centered perspective, preventing us from experiencing the unity and interconnectedness of all life. What makes this so insidious is that the ego hides all of these consequences behind the veil of normalcy. The cycle of dissatisfaction, the divisions within society, the feeling of separateness, these are all accepted as part of life. We rarely question them because the ego has normalized them. We believe that this is just the way things are, that this is the reality we must live with. But what if this reality is nothing more than a construct, a fabrication of the ego itself? The time has come to face the reality of these consequences. The first step toward breaking free from the ego's grip is to recognize how deeply it shapes our lives and our world. Once we understand its influence, we can begin to dismantle its hold on us and uncover a reality that is freer, more authentic, and more interconnected. But how do we begin this process of liberation? To answer that, we must explore the ways in which we can break free from the ego's control and reclaim our true potential. The path to freedom begins with understanding the nature of the ego, but it does not end there. It is a journey of self-awareness, transformation, and inner awakening, and that journey starts now. Breaking free from the grip of the ego is not a simple task. It requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires a radical shift in consciousness, a revolution of the mind. The ego's hold on us is so deeply ingrained that it feels like a natural part of our being. It defines the very way we see ourselves and the world. But to break free from this mental prison, we must first recognize the lie the ego has been feeding us, that this narrow, limited identity is all we are capable of being. The first step in this rebellion is awareness. Without awareness, there can be no change. The ego operates in the shadows, pulling the strings of our thoughts, emotions, and actions without us even realizing it. It's like a puppet master, controlling our perceptions, telling us who we should be, and convincing us that the roles it has given us are our true selves. To break free, we must become keenly aware of the ego's influence over our thoughts and actions. We need to see it for what it is, a force that distorts reality to fit its own narrative. Awareness means noticing the ego's patterns, how it reacts to fear, how it defends itself when challenged, how it distorts the truth to maintain its grip on our identity. One of the first signs of the ego's involvement is resistance. Whenever you feel resistance to change, whenever you notice yourself holding on to a belief, a role, or an identity that feels uncomfortable to challenge, that's the ego at work. It resists anything that threatens its sense of control. Whether it's resisting a new way of thinking, an unfamiliar experience, or a new belief that doesn't fit into the ego's narrow view of the world, this resistance is the first barrier to breaking free. When you recognize resistance, don't fight it. Instead, pause and ask yourself, why do I resist? Why does this particular change trigger such discomfort? Is it because it challenges the identity the ego has worked so hard to create? Is it because it threatens the security the ego has built around your sense of self? Once you begin to recognize the ego's resistance, you can start to question it. This is where the true rebellion begins. The ego thrives on unquestioned beliefs. It feeds on certainty and control, which is why it creates fixed identities and rigid worldviews. When you begin to question those beliefs, when you challenge the idea that the ego's version of reality is the only valid one, you start to crack open the shell it has built around you. You are no longer at the mercy of the ego's narrative, you are starting to create a new one. This process of questioning is not just intellectual, it is emotional and existential. It requires you to confront the fears, insecurities, and vulnerabilities that the ego has hidden away in the shadows. What if I'm not who I think I am? What if the identity I've built for myself is just a story I've been telling myself? These questions aren't meant to make you feel lost or unmoored. Instead, they are meant to dismantle the false sense of security that the ego provides, allowing you to create a more authentic sense of self, one that is not defined by external validation, societal roles, or past experiences. The next phase of this rebellion is acceptance. Acceptance of the truth that the ego is not the enemy, but a part of us. This is crucial. The ego is not something that can be eradicated or destroyed. It is a natural part of the human psyche. The rebellion isn't about rejecting the ego outright, it's about redefining your relationship with it. The ego is like a tool. When used properly, it can serve a purpose, but when it becomes the master of your reality, it creates limitations. Accepting the ego as part of your experience doesn't mean allowing it to control your life. It means recognizing that it is there, but no longer letting it dictate who you are or what you can achieve. In this phase, you begin to disidentify with the ego. You realize that you are not the thoughts, beliefs, or labels that the ego has imposed on you. You are not your job title, your social status, or your past mistakes. You are not the sum of your fears, anxieties, or limitations. You are something deeper, something that exists beyond the confines of the ego. One powerful practice in this process is mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability to observe your thoughts and emotions without attaching to them, without identifying with them. It is the ability to witness your mind at work, without allowing it to control your actions. Through mindfulness, you begin to see the ego for what it is, a collection of thoughts and reactions that arise in response to external stimuli. These thoughts are not you. They are merely passing mental phenomena. By practicing mindfulness, you begin to create space between yourself and the ego. You no longer automatically react to the ego's triggers, but instead, you become the observer of those reactions. This space allows you to make conscious choices, to act from a place of clarity rather than from the knee-jerk responses of the ego. Mindfulness gives you the power to choose your actions, thoughts, and beliefs, rather than being controlled by them. Another essential part of breaking free from the ego is embracing discomfort. The ego thrives on comfort, familiarity, and control. It wants to keep things predictable and safe, which is why it resists anything that challenges the status quo. But real transformation happens outside of your comfort zone. It happens when you step into the unknown, when you face the fears that the ego has been hiding from you. The ego will tell you to avoid discomfort, to stick with what feels safe and familiar. But true liberation lies in stepping into the discomfort, facing your fears head-on, and allowing yourself to grow. It's about realizing that discomfort is not a sign that something is wrong, but a sign that you are expanding, evolving, and stepping into a more authentic version of yourself. As you move through this rebellion, it's important to remember that this is not a linear process. There will be moments when the ego will try to reassert its control, when the familiar thoughts and beliefs will rise up again, attempting to pull you back into old patterns. But with each moment of awareness, each moment of questioning, each moment of embracing discomfort, you break free a little more. This is a gradual, ongoing process of transformation, not an event that happens all at once. Through this rebellion, you begin to reclaim your power. You realize that the true essence of who you are is not confined by the ego's limitations. You are more than the roles, labels, and identities that the ego has imposed upon you. You are a vast, infinite consciousness, capable of experiencing life in all its fullness, without being constrained by the small, narrow story the ego has created. And this is where the breakthrough happens. When you let go of the ego's grip, you step into a new reality, a reality that is not defined by limitations, fears, or external validation. You step into a world where you can live authentically, where your actions are guided by your true desires, your deepest values, and your innate potential. The rebellion is not about fighting the ego. It's about transcending it, seeing through its illusions, and realizing that you are more than the identity it has constructed for you. The ego is a part of you, but it is not all of you. And when you free yourself from its control, you step into a life of true freedom, freedom to create, to experience, and to be who you truly are. Now that we've explored the process of breaking free, it's time to uncover the ultimate truth, the final realization that will completely shift your understanding of yourself and the world around you. As you journey through the rebellion of shedding the ego's control, you begin to see glimpses of a deeper truth, a profound realization that shifts everything. You have struggled against the ego, questioned its hold over you, and transformed your relationship with it. But here's the final revelation, the insight that brings everything into focus. The ego, as powerful and pervasive as it is, was never the true you to begin with. The ego is merely a mental construct, a collection of thoughts, desires, fears, and roles that we have identified with throughout our lives. It is not your true essence, nor is it the core of your being. The ego is a temporary, transient force, a creation of the mind designed to help you navigate the external world and maintain a sense of identity in a chaotic universe. But in doing so, it creates a barrier between you and the deeper, more authentic part of yourself. When you begin to detach from the ego and observe it from a place of awareness, you realize that the real you, the person you've been searching for, the one who has always been there beneath the layers of fear, desire, and judgment, is not defined by the ego at all. The ultimate truth is that you are not the roles you play, the identities you've constructed, or the beliefs you've inherited. You are not your past, your mistakes, or your successes. You are not the sum of your fears, your insecurities, or your accomplishments. You are something far more vast and profound. You are the observer of the ego. You are the consciousness that experiences the world, not through the narrow lens of the ego, but through the boundless, limitless potential of the present moment. This is the ultimate liberation, the realization that the ego, while it may shape your experience of reality, does not define who you truly are. You are not confined by its walls. You are the awareness that perceives, the stillness behind the thoughts, the silence that holds the noise of the mind. This realization is not just an intellectual understanding. It is an experiential shift, a sudden awakening to the fact that you have always been free, even when the ego made you believe you were trapped. The ego is a tool for navigating the world, but it is not the essence of who you are. The essence of you is boundless, infinite, and interconnected with everything around you. To fully grasp this truth is to experience a shift in consciousness, A realization that your sense of self was never truly limited, never confined to the thoughts and beliefs you held about yourself. You begin to understand that all the struggles, the conflicts, the desires, and the fears you have experienced were merely products of the ego trying to define you, trying to keep you safe in a world that feels uncertain and chaotic. But the deeper truth is that the world itself is not chaotic. It is simply the ego that distorts it, that narrows your perception, and keeps you locked in a story of limitation. When you transcend the ego, you see the world as it truly is, a vast, interconnected web of energy, experiences, and consciousness. You see that everything is connected, that the boundaries between you and the rest of existence are not as solid as they seem. In this state of awareness, you experience oneness, not as an abstract concept, but as a living, breathing reality. You no longer feel separate from others, from nature, or from the universe itself. You are not just an individual ego floating in a sea of separate selves, you are part of the whole, a thread in the tapestry of existence. You begin to understand that true freedom comes not from fulfilling the desires of the ego, but from letting go of the need to control, to separate, and to define yourself by labels, roles, and external markers. This shift is liberating, but it is also humbling. You realize that the ego's desire for control, validation, and certainty was not only unnecessary, it was based on a false belief in separateness. The ego's quest for power and security only perpetuated the cycle of suffering. By releasing that need, you step into a life of profound peace, acceptance, and connection. But here's the most powerful part. When you let go of the ego's grip, you don't lose your sense of self, you gain a deeper, truer sense of it. The true self is not defined by what you have, what you do, or how others perceive you. It is the space of awareness in which all experiences arise and dissolve. It is the unchanging essence that exists beneath the fluctuations of the mind, beneath the roles, the desires, the fears, and the judgments. As you look around, you see the world not as a collection of separate objects or individuals, but as an interconnected whole. Every person, every moment, every experience is part of the same infinite flow of consciousness. There is no longer any need to compete, compare, or cling to an image of yourself. You are free to be who you are without the weight of the ego's judgments. This final realization is not an endpoint, it is the beginning of a new way of being. It is a journey of self-discovery, of continuously peeling back the layers of illusion that the ego has constructed, and of reconnecting with your true nature. It is a path of awakening, an awakening to the reality that you are not the story the ego tells, but the awareness that holds that story. You are not the thoughts you think, but the space in which those thoughts arise and fade away. And so, with this realization, you are no longer bound by the ego's limitations. You are free to live a life of authenticity, creativity, and connection. You are free to explore the depths of your own consciousness, to experience the world with clarity and openness, and to embrace the infinite possibilities that exist in each present moment. This is the ultimate truth. The ego creates your reality, but it does not define it. You are the creator of your own experience, and when you realize this, you begin to see that your true self is far greater than any role, any label, or any belief the ego could ever impose upon you. The reality you've been living is merely a projection of the mind. When you see through the illusion, you step into the freedom of your true self, and that is where true power lies. So, stand tall in this newfound awareness. You are not the identity the world has given you. You are the vast, infinite consciousness experiencing life, unbound by the limits of the ego. You are free. And with this freedom comes the power to create your own reality, one that reflects the true essence of who you are. The journey has just begun.